Your subjects hope, dread sight, the crown upon your brows may flourish long, and that your arm may in your God be strong. Oh, may your sceptre numerous nations sway, and all with love and readiness obey. But how shall we the British King reward? Rule thou in peace, our Father and our Lord. Midst the remembrance of thy favors past, the meanest peasants most admire the last. May George, beloved by all the nations round, live with heaven's choicest, constant blessings crowned. Great God, direct and guard him from on high, and from his head let every evil fly, and may each climb with equal gladness see a monarch's smile can set his subjects free.
All right, guys, welcome to the first part of our talks on Patriarcha. So this is the book that we're going to start covering. We're going to do the whole thing. It's a very dense book. First of all, did you like that song? Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you something. So that song is actually a poem by Phyllis Wheatley, who was an African-American woman. And that song is actually praising King George III. So, we're all about diverse voices and like hearing from intersectional, black female voices on this show. So, all you anti-monarchist bigots, y'all just need to sit down. A black queen is speaking, okay? Okay. Anyways, also speaking of singing, this reminded me. So I'm having to re-record this because something went wrong with OBS and it jacked up one of the videos. I had already posted the video. I was like, well, I'll fix it for the next one. But this also reminded me, speaking of singing, that I'll say one more good thing and one more bad thing about that House of David show. The bad thing is the singing. Not that it, so they make a big deal, probably about once or twice an episode, there's a song where, David plays on the harp. The melodies are cool, I mean, and he's singing in Hebrew and whatever, and it's fine. But this is actually probably what made me stop watching the shows. I couldn't stand this. Is he does like the Protestant worship leader thing, where it's like that fake emotion. Where, I hate that, dude. I cannot stand it. That's probably what honestly got me to stop watching the show. I was just like, I was watching. I can't do it. I can't do it. And I honestly don't think anyone in the ancient world sang like that. It's just like with the dialogue, where like they're too casual. Honestly, like in the ancient world, things would have probably looked way more like the way the Orthodox Church sings now. It's very sober, controlled. You're not doing that. Okay, now, all right, but I will say one good thing about the show as well. I mean, watch it for yourself, make up your own mind. But the way that they depict Joab and Abner is actually really good because I really like Abner, and the guy who plays him is that Israeli actor who's one of the sidekicks on The Mummy. He does a really good job. He plays him really, really well. And then Joab is just like a psychopath, which is funny because my kids were watching it with me, and they were like, "What is you know?" Joab just kind of seems like, ugh, And I was like, well, wait till you read the Bible. Like he's killing people left and right. Anyways, I thought that was actually the way they portrayed those two guys was actually really good. Abner's a very sympathetic character, which is kind of the impression I got after reading the Bible. So, anyways, all right. So we're gonna talk about Patriarcha, and I'm gonna go through and throw up some pictures of all the people and things that I'm talking about. So I'm very excited to bring this to you guys today. Uh, Sir Robert Filmer is a fantastic writer on monarchy, on English history. This guy literally haunted John Locke's nightmares, which John Locke, physiognomy check, I really, really, really don't like John Locke. I cannot stand him. And eventually, we're going to go through a detailed walkthrough of Locke's two treatises of government. The first treatise that Locke did is not super well known. It's not really talked about because it's very ad hoc, special pleading. It's just really like embarrassed attempt to answer Sir Robert Filmer's arguments. Uh, so in order to get to Locke, you have to read Filmer first because Locke is just responding to Filmer very badly, I might add. Um, so the first time that I heard about Sir Robert Filmer, like actually heard about him, was when I was reading this book called From Dawn to Decadence by Jacques Barzun. Barzun was this amazing like educator and historian, and it just I can't say enough good things about the guy. But what's funny is when he describes the intellectual debate between Sir Robert Filmer and John Locke, he says that Filmer like sticks close to the Bible, and like has a very pronounced Christian worldview, whereas Locke is the new man, right? He's ushering in the new age, and he's using all these new arguments from like human rights and human dignity and stuff like that. So Barzun thinks this is great because he's like, yeah, Filmer's like, and he doesn't attack him, but he's like, yeah, he's the old way of looking at things, and Locke is the new way. That makes it sound like this, this is like this debate between these two like competing ways of looking at the world, and obviously the Locke is the better one. And so I read that, and that's what kind of started me down the rabbit trail of eventually wanting to read Robert Filmer. This was like 6, 7 years ago, and I finally read him last year. So you might be asking, why have I never heard of Sir Robert Filmer? Because I think most people haven't. I will tell you that his arguments are phenomenal. He has never been answered on the points that he makes ever. Like once we go through the book, you'll see there is no comeback from this. He hits you with scripture, exegetes it very simply, plainly. It's not, there's nothing crazy in it. He's very logical. He takes apart Aristotle. He takes apart all the Catholic writers who dealt with popular sovereignty and all that. He works through English history. He works through legal history. He answered Hobbes. He answered the arguments that Locke would be putting forward. Bellarmine, Suarez. I mean, he answers everybody, dude, and he does it in this very witty and concise way that is just so good and so meaty and so pithy, and I love it. So why have you never heard about him? In fact, if you do hear about him at all, it's usually in the context of somebody saying, well, like, Filmer was an idiot. Filmer was a moron. Filmer was just an old fuddy-duddy. Filmer was a reactionary, right? That's the only kind of stuff that you'll really hear about him. Never an analysis of his arguments. Never, never any kind of like, oh yeah, if you want to read, let me close this blind here, get some light to look a little bit better. If you read his arguments, these are like the best that the old order had to offer. Nobody says that. Nobody talks about that. And the reason why is because they don't want you to read him. This is wrong think. Okay? Puritans hate this guy. They all hate this guy. All right? Because he just destroys them. Like all their reasoning for popular sovereignty and government and all the consent of the government, all that. He just shows that scripturally there's absolutely no basis for it. He shows that English common law has nothing to do with popular sovereignty. In fact, it all testifies against it. If you actually go back and read, like he's going to go through and just quote line after line after line. Um, yeah. Anyways, so the reason why you haven't heard of him is because he's actually really good. Um, he's impossible for modern people to deal with. Um, so they don't want you to read him. All right. All right. So I had already been a monarchist for like a really long time. I had already had my old YouTube channel, Theopolitics. I had gotten rid of it. I'd been out of the game for years, but I just kept reading. And so one day I was like, I'm going to read Patriarcha. And I read Patriarcha and I was like, what? Dude, I thought like I knew the scriptural exegesis and the points to make in favor of monarchy, but this guy just takes it to another level. Um, So instead of just talking about how much I like him, let's see if we can start getting to the text here. I mean, we probably won't actually get to his text today because the introduction to this book is really good. So this book is put out by Imperium Press. So Imperium Press puts out a lot of really good books, like a lot of really good books. They get a lot of my money, and I will say that. They put out really good editions. The typesetting and the covers, like everything is really good on these. I mean, this is a very professional looking book. Um, I have my intellectual and ideological disagreements with the guys who run Imperium Press. I think they're neo-pagans, but they're sort of more like the Evolian neo-pagans, where they're a little more reasonable, and they'll put out Christian stuff like that. Joseph de Maistre, stuff that's um, really good material that we can use. And they have some interesting, like I used to, follow them on Substack and whatever. They'd say some interesting stuff. Um, so I highly recommend if this is a topic you really want to dive into someday. This is a book that if you're an English speaking monarchist, this book is going to be key. And the reason why we're going over this book and we're going to talk about it is because if you understand this, then the English Civil War starts to make a lot more sense. And we have to talk about those issues before we get to the American Revolution, uh, and why it's, a bunch of propaganda. It's lies. Like almost everything we know about the American Revolution is a lie. And that's the next thing we're going to do. Also, we're not going to cover the entire, like, we're not even going to cover this whole book. We're just going to cover, like, that. Because the rest of it's really good, but we'll have to get to that kind of slowly, piece by piece. This is going to be kind of dense. All right, so who was Sir Robert Filmer? Well, Sir Robert Filmer was born in 1588, the eldest of 18 children. Based. Both sides of his family were heavily tied in with the Virginia Company, so he has a connection to us. They helped get this country going. Sir Robert was incredibly well educated, but he was a very private man. He tried to stay out of the English Civil War, but the Puritans, the revolutionaries, they knew where his sympathies lay, so they were always stopping by to loot his castle. And he also had to pay the enormous taxation that you paid for wrongthink against the revolutionaries. So if they knew that you were sympathetic to the king and his cause, you paid taxes weekly, not yearly. And the amount of tax that you paid was per week was the tax that had been paid per year when the king ruled. So I'm always flabbergasted. I'm absolutely we're going to have to do like I've got like 20, 30 books on the English Civil War that we'll have to go through where I, I don't see how anyone can defend Cromwell or the Puritans. Yeah, okay, maybe you don't like Charles I. Maybe he did some stuff that's kind of, you know, under the table or underhanded, yeah, okay, whatever, fine. But what comes after him is so much worse. I mean, it's just so much worse. And the historical record is very clear, and everybody just sweeps that under the rug, doesn't want to talk about it. Um, so the Puritans who screamed about more freedom, jealous of their liberty, I hate that phrase, every 5 seconds, they're taxing royalists weekly what they used to pay yearly in taxes. This is why when Charles II comes back to be restored as king, nobody fired a shot to try to stop him. Parliament, because at that point, this is after Cromwell and Cromwell's son, Parliament literally owned half of the property in the nation because it had been confiscated to pay the exorbitant tax rates. So, I mean, it's just, oh my gosh, you just, SJWs always lie. SJWs always down, or double down. SJWs always project, right? That's how you know the Puritans are SJWs, because of the lies we've been fed about the English Civil War. Let's see. So Sir Robert suffered under all this as well. He was actually imprisoned on a trumped up charge that ended up being proved not true. He did eventually get released. He dies in 1653, and a lot of his work is published posthumously. So I'm going to talk more about the English Civil War and Charles I later. But one small note, we're actually going to get into the introduction now. One small note for those who do buy this book and read it, the introduction is good, but the guy, I think this is one of the Imperium Press guys, who writes, and I've got books that he's written that we're going to cover that are really good, but he's a little bit off base. I would disagree with him in the introduction where he says that the divine right doctrine advocated by Sir Robert Filmer is a modern invention. I don't quite think that's true. Maybe some of the exact formulations are, but divine right of kings is in the scriptures, and it's in the Eastern Roman Empire and Imperial Russia. So he's writing this from a very like Western European view, where there's like feudalism, and then there's this divine right monarchy. But it's actually been there all along. Maybe it just wasn't practiced. So just be aware of that if you buy the book. Now, what the author of the intro gets very, very right is that Whig history, the modern idea that we're just constantly moving into more and more progress. Everything is this linear progression towards more freedom, more popular sovereignty, a revealing or discovering of obvious natural truths about government. That's hogwash. So the story of kings having their power and authority curtailed by parliaments and revolutions and the democratic process is presented to us as ending government control over people's lives. But in reality, it marks the enormous centralization of power in the state. This is the opposite of what we're taught. Like, we sit here and go, how is it that Americans rebelled over a 2% tax on tea, and now we're taxed on everything, and you can't do this, and the EPA, and the blah, 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 blah. Stuff that never would have happened, right? 100 years ago or 200 years ago, or when we were under the British, we had like almost no oversight and almost no taxation. Well, how did we get here? We don't have a king anymore. We got a parliament, or we got a Congress, and we elect them, and blah blah blah. Why don't they do what we elect them to do? Well, that's because you've been lied to. The system was never set up for you. It's set up for the oligarchs to extract resources, to centralize power. So getting rid of the king is not decentralizing government. It's actually a move toward centralization. Why? Well, if your government is democratically elected, then that government can justify everything it does by saying, we have a mandate from the people. You voted for this. And if you didn't vote for us and you don't like it, well, you can vote in the next election and try to change stuff again. After we've had a couple of years to just run riot. And if that doesn't work, you try again. So they keep gaslighting you. Kings had to rule much more cautiously than people might think. Kings actually had things like the church that could be counterweights to them. Parliaments and Congresses, they're not beholden to church authority. So what? You excommunicate 20 members of Parliament. So what? Doesn't mean anything. They'll just elect new people to fill in the spots. On the other hand, if your authority rests with a king, and the king gets excommunicated, like what St. Ambrose of Milan did to St. Theodosius the Great, that creates a real problem. And St. Theodosius has to repent and come back and atone for the sins of his army. So when you take away a king and you put this kind of faceless bureaucracy, nobody can really keep up with all the moving parts, who's who, whatever, a faceless bureaucracy with the covering of the will of the people for its actions has way more, it's much more intrusive, it's much more centralized, it's actually a much more powerful entity than any kingdom in history. So we've been talking about Whigs. Who are the Whigs? The Whigs, and it's spelled, it's actually associated with the Whigs. You think of, 17th, 18th century, everybody's wearing the wigs. Well, this is referencing that. This includes people like John Locke, the Baron de Montesquieu, founding fathers, all the way down to like Justin Trudeau, right? They're all part of it. All of our politicians today are Whigs, basically. In their version of events, Sir Robert Filmer is kind of a foil. So, from the introduction, quote, in the case of Filmer, his place in this Whig scheme of history is to act as the symbol of an old patriarchal and monarchical world that is vanquished by the modern John Locke. End quote. That's page 12. But in reality, John Locke is not very original. His ideas about separation of church and state, the social contract, the state of nature, popular sovereignty, these all predate him. And actually, John Locke is not a good scholar. Was not known for being a good scholar, even in his own day. He was just kind of middle of the road. He wasn't particularly respected. He's been rehabilitated later by Whigs to try to justify their seizure of power. Okay? So Locke is a great microcosm of how history gets presented by Whigs. According to them, Locke and all the others who are associated with him discover all these fundamental, self-evident truths. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Okay, Locke is the, life, liberty, and property, which property is turned into pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence. So they discover all these self-evident truths, and then everyone just gets on board except for some old fuddy-duddies. In reality, and we're going to see this pop up over and over again throughout history, and it's definitely the case with the American Revolution. In reality, Locke wrote to justify the glorious revolution of 1688, post hoc, after the fact. It's very important to remember that revolutionaries don't usually carry the day with their arguments. They kill their opponents and then they make up a mythology later as if their triumph was inevitable. If I didn't think I would have an aneurysm, I would cover... Okay, this is like the fourth time I'm trying to record this. Either the audio messes up or the video messes up. OBS is a pain in the neck. And I don't change any settings in between, but it'll just... stuff won't work. So, I'm having to... Okay. Alright, so let's pick back up here. So Locke's a great microcosm of how history gets presented by Whigs. But let's think about, okay, so for example, quote, consider the fact that in 1687 King James II had attempted to extend religious tolerance to a degree greater than that supported by John Locke in his A Letter Concerning Toleration, and greater than the Tolerance Act of 1689 introduced under William of Orange and his Glorious Revolution government. This all sits rather at odds with Whig history, or rather standard modern history. End quote, page 12. Locke and Parliament famously thought that it was very dangerous to allow Catholics to practice their religion, because it meant that a religious authority, the Pope, could influence English politics. I mean, it's the whole reason the Anglican Church started. It's because the Pope was an intermediary who could tell you, who could wield authority, right? Wouldn't let Henry get divorced. So, but in that sense, Catholics not being allowed to have religious freedom by Locke, by Parliament, by King William, while King James II, the tyrant that they deposed, would have let Protestants and Catholics have religious toleration. Okay, that doesn't square with the Whig narrative of history, which is that our Whig guys have always been pushing us more and more into freedom and sovereignty, and everybody has more rights, and everybody has liberty. Well, hold on a second. If you're making all these exceptions, then guess what you're doing? It's our democracy, right? It's our parliament. It's fortified democracy. It's all the same stuff we see today. We can't tolerate the intolerant. It just you got to make your exception and your enemy, and oh well, we'll make all these ad hoc exceptions as to why they don't fit in our scheme and they don't actually deserve the rights of man that we claim everyone has. It's all super hypocritical, and I get it. I 100% get it, because they're worried about. I mean, we just talked about the Samurai William book. They're worried about the Jesuits and the Pope taking over England. So it's like, yeah, I get it. I'm not even making a judgment call either way. But at the same time, I don't want to hear about the rights of man and universal human rights. And I don't want to hear about that and have all this Locke and all these guys brought into it, incorporated. It's like, dude, like they would be run out of town on a rail today by the people who are their intellectual descendants because of what they believe, which is also odd because like you'll see a lot of Catholics now defending and praising the American Revolution and like trying to rehabilitate it, and it's like, guys, this was not about you, and this was not fought for you. This was fought very much against you. It's just bizarre. Um, so like in the American Revolution, the founding fathers freaked out. I mean, freaked out because King George III let the Catholics in Quebec have religious freedom, right? The Quebec Act. So he cut off all their land speculation. So they all lost a bunch of money, because he actually wanted to honor the treaty with the Native Americans. And then he gives the Catholics, they can have their bishops and they can have religious freedom. This is just like the Puritans and their descendants in New England, the founding fathers, they freak out about this. It's a popish plot. It's a Romish plot. They lose their minds over it. And then they're going to turn around and tell you about all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Yeah, right. Come on. Biggest bunch of hypocrites out there. So if the standard historical account is wrong, if we're not actually moving towards more and more freedom, what should we consider as an alternative? Quote, just as Filmer was writing in defense of a specific political arrangement of overt centralized monarchy, Locke and his contemporaries were likewise writing in defense of a specific political arrangement in the form of centralized parliamentary government. The success of the relative institutions better explains the success of the theory than the other way around, end quote, page 12. The revolutionaries won the shooting war. That's why their theories survived. Not because they were superior, not because they were more logical, not because they made more sense, just because they were backed up by the barrel of a gun. As Chairman Mao would say, all political power comes from the barrel of a gun. Quote, despite the assumption that one would get from a modern education in politics, many of Filmer's criticisms of the anarchistic underpinnings of his opponents in Patriarcha have been woefully unanswered, or if they were provided with an answer, they have either been weak or of dubious sincerity. No one demonstrates this better than Locke and his criticisms of Filmer in the two treatises of government. When comparing Patriarcha and the two treatises of government, it is worth noting that Filmer's work is not simply a biblical exegesis combined with natural rights theory. It actually relies mostly on historical references and facts supported by documents, and is a genuine attempt to provide an accurate and truthful model of historical institutions and the working of authority. Locke's dismissal of Filmer is contained in Book 1 of the two treatises on government, and it is almost entirely an attempt to dispute Filmer's biblical exegesis with recourse to biblically derived claims of natural liberty granted to man by God. This is an argument which, if one were to raise it as a basis for liberalism in the present day, would be met with confusion and derision. So, no tolerance for Catholics. They're awful. We need to hunt them down. They don't get any religious liberty. and which is now they're trying to turn that against us, against the Orthodox. And then no, the Bible is the basis for our natural God-given rights. Both of those ideas are completely out of fashion now. So Locke really shouldn't even be part of this tradition anymore. But whatever. Locke's ultimate underlying claim is that authority inheres in the individual as a result of man's nature as given by God. So think of the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Filmer, meanwhile, asserts that man's nature is inherently structured and marked by authority in the form of patriarchal relationships, again, as determined by God. End quote, page 15 to 16. So does God create radically autonomous individuals, or does he create beings for communion with himself and others? That's what's at stake here. That's ultimately what the two views of Filmer versus Locke, that's what it's coming down to. So Locke is saying God makes radically autonomous individuals that, their will is their highest faculty, and, they have the right to determine everything themselves, and you have to get their consent. And then you've got Filmer, on the other hand, saying, no, what the Bible teaches is that we are made in community, in communion. There is authority, there is a structure to man's being and to his relationship with others. It's not all about your will and your whatever. It's about patriarchal authority that's been given from God. That is what structures, puts limits and boundaries, and that's how we have communion with each other. That's how we're organized. We are automatically organized and structured as people, as human beings. We're not radically atomized, autonomous, individuals. So that's really what's at stake here. And as the author of the introduction points out, judging between these two arguments, Locke's account is deeply unreasonable. We'll see why when we cover the two treatises of government. So we'll get to that more later. The last thing we need to consider is the definition of the word freedom. And I'm going to go ahead and throw up a slide here just so you can kind of follow along as I'm talking. So the way the word freedom is used in Locke and Filmer is very different. Filmer, as we're going to see, uses freedom in its older sense, its original sense, going back into feudalism, where it meant being freed from all your feudal duties, your vassalage, and your obligations by the king. It was something that had to be granted by the sovereign authority. Quote, we have a relationship involving three parties, the central power of the king, then the subject, and finally the intermediaries to whom the subject was initially also subject to, be this local lords, the church, or some other corporate entity. The king removed the intermediaries who were his competitors within the power structure by raising the station of the individual with claims of granting him freedom. Filmer is very much aware of this passive nature of the linguistic construct of freedom, wherein an individual is granted their freedom from a specific relationship by a greater political authority. Pages 19 through 20. So why is this important? Because, as we will see, freedom is used in a very different sense now, and its meaning was changed on purpose by people with an agenda. Filmer calls them out because they were doing it in his day. To receive your freedom from a higher authority is not the same as being free in and of yourself or freeing yourself, setting yourself free. For example, the Bible uses the older idea, the Filmer's correct view of freedom, repeatedly. We have been set free from sin, from the devil, from death, from all the intermediary things that held us subject, that kept us in the kingdom of Satan. And we are told why we have been set free, to become subjects of God's kingdom, to fight for him, to live for him, to grow his kingdom. So God removes the things which stood between us and him. He sets us free. That's the older meaning of the word freedom. It's something that's given to you by a higher authority. And in the political earthly realm, the concept is similar. However, just a note of caution, it will break down if you press it too far, because a king might consider, for example, the church as an intermediary and might want to break the church's grip on people. However, the idea of freedom as something passive, which is given, still holds. What Filmer didn't like was when people used freedom in an active sense. They changed the meaning of the word because that's when the role of the higher authority is obscured for the sake of greater centralization. So let's break this down. Freedom is always granted by a higher authority. The law, for example, which is a higher authority, says that when children attain a certain age, they are not now bound to their parents in the way they were before. The law is a higher authority. To make the argument that simply by nature children eventually are free from their parents without law or society as a higher power that grants that to them, when in fact that is what happens, is to hide the role of the higher authority, to let a higher power centralize power by freeing individuals without paying any attention to why that higher power might be doing it. What's their motivation? Okay, like the civil rights movement. The government, as a higher authority, set people free, quote unquote, gave them rights. They didn't do it out of the goodness of their heart. I'll tell you that right now. That they could not have cared at all. It was because and ending, segregation and all these other things. This was not done out of the goodness of their hearts. There were people who, were campaigning and who wanted it to happen, who probably did have, they were trying to do the right thing. But that's not why the government did it. And they kind of hide the fact that they were the ones responsible for it. I'm supposed to ask why, why they did this. And actually, I'll be very clear. This hiding, this freeing and then hiding who's doing it, this is how the devil works. He promises you freedom, makes you think it's what you want, that you deserve it. All the while, he's binding you closer and closer to himself. He hides his hand. This is what modern states that preach freedom and human rights are doing. When they free you, they atomize you. They break up the family. They destroy the authority of the father. They destroy parental rights. They secularize the public sphere, which reduces people's ties to the church. And once you're atomized and deracinated and you're not connected to any intermediaries or church or whatever, then you can be used like cattle, your pawns, your human resources for war and production. So they destroy any connection to any intermediaries so that you will be in relation to the state. That's it. Now, as I said, it is not a bad thing in and of itself to be tied to a centralized power, because this is what God does for us. This is what Christian kings often did. For example, when St. Constantine legislated against the pagan priesthoods, when he stopped supporting them with tax money, he freed people from a tie to a bad intermediary and brought them closer to himself, to the religion that he wanted. In both cases, though, with God and with St. Constantine, they were pretty open about why this is being done. They tell you why they're setting you free and what they expect of you. God wants people in his kingdom and to follow his laws. St. Constantine wanted his kingdom to be Christian. The modern state hides what it is doing and flatters your ego. That's scary, because whereas with a king you could see what's going on a lot easier, and there's a lot of powerful intermediaries like the church or the family that could prevent a king centralizing from getting out of hand, if it's all just your due and your rights for being a human being on this planet, you'll buy whatever the centralizing authority is selling you. The modern language of rights and freedom is a cover for centralizing power and extracting resources and compliance on an unprecedented scale while believing we are freer than we've ever been. I'll give you a very concrete example. When England became Protestant, one of the first things that happened was that tons of church feast days were taken off the calendar. Why? Because you couldn't make people work on those days. And the nobles made it very clear to Queen Elizabeth that money and productivity were hampered by everyone having off all the time. It also destroys a lot of people's ties to the church to get rid of a lot of feast days, because now you're not in church as often, you got to work, etc. And when the French Revolution happens, they change the calendar. No more feast days, same deal. You get a 10-day week and you get half a day off in those 10 days, right? I'm gonna hammer this point home, because you don't hate Puritans and revolutionaries enough. They're evil. They are the devil's workmen. And the same thing is just, well, we're just getting rid of superstition, and, well, you shouldn't be praying to saints anyways, and blah, 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 blah. It's the same, right? Whether you're a Protestant or a French deist revolutionary or atheist communist, it's superstition, it's priestcraft, it's this, it's that. It's like, what do you want? What do you actually want? You don't care about this. There's something ulterior behind it, right? Now, don't get me wrong, when I say that they're the devil's workmen, I don't mean every Calvinist or Reformed person who likes the Puritans walking around today. I'm talking about historical movements and people, not misled or ignorant people like Redeemed Zoomer. Well, basically, Puritan New England was basically utopia on Earth. No, it's not. That is absolutely absurd. Only an ideologue would say something like that. Okay. I think I'm going to go ahead and stop it there, edit, put this all together, and next time we will pick up on, we'll get a little more into the Protestantism stuff. We'll talk about epistemology, ethics, and how the Enlightenment changed epistemology. We'll get into that. All right, thank you guys. Have a good day.
Most gracious and omnipotent and everlasting Parliament, whose power and majesty are greater than all kings by odds, and to account you less than gods must needs be blasphemy. Moses and Aaron ne'er did do more wonder than is wrought by you. For England's is Israel, but though the Red Sea we have passed, if you to Canaan bring us at last, is it not a miracle? The assembly doth a better frame, which saves us all with ease, provided still we have the grace to believe the house in the first place. Our works be what they strange your power and holiness. Can't the Irish devils dispossess? His end is very stout, but though you do so